This is also another GRDC funded project that we're working on at the moment, and Ben Fleet works on this with me. So I'm just going to talk about sowing time, particularly of the crops, because there has been a bit of shift in thinking. Many years ago, people used to suggest delayed sowing as a way of managing weeds, because you just gave a bit more time for weeds to come up. But as we've been discovering through some of the recent research, that by putting the crops later in the season, you in fact can give weeds a bit of an advantage, because you're planting crops at a time when conditions are not really that suitable for their growth. You're going into the colder time of the year, here I'm talking about second half of May and into June, and that can really slow down their growth and allow the weeds to compete better. So you might have killed, let's say, 20% of the seed bank by that delay, but the weeds that are still going to left behind or going to come up are going to in fact compete even more aggressively. And I'll show you some data on the work that we've been doing for the last 3 years now. This is our third growing season. And I should also acknowledge Hart, because they are one of our collaborators on this project. So we have collaboration with groups from Victoria into South Australia and right through to Minnipa. And also we do work in WA in this project as well. So it's quite a large project covering the southern and the western regions of Australia. So a lot of growers now have, as we all know, much bigger machinery, wider, bigger tractors, everything. So in theory, they can complete their sowing much quicker, much earlier than they used to be able to do. So, should then you be waiting around to get the weed germination before you're going to plant the crop? I guess has been the question some people have asked. And what has become much clearer in the last few years is that there is no substitute for that warm soil conditions from second half of April to, let's say, mid-May, because that is so important for the rapid growth of the crop and the seeds that we're planting. They just bounce out of the ground and they grow so much quicker. So we wanted to see whether even under weedy conditions, they would be able to suppress the weeds and give us high yields, but also cause suppression of the weeds. I would say once it starts to go below 15 degrees C, our crops really start to slow down. As a rule of thumb, when it's dropping below 15 and heading into sort of 13s and 12s, growth is going to be much, much slower, whereas cold-loving weeds such as ryegrass will still do very well under those conditions. This part, the agronomy in terms of weed-free conditions, I guess is well known, that if you can increase the crop water use by planting earlier, produce more biomass, well, you're going to get more yields. But we wanted to see how that would work under weedy situations. So I'm going to show you 3 examples of our field trials, just to illustrate the main principles of what we've been finding through our research. So all these trials have a similar design. They're split plot, sort of, it's a factorial kind of combinations, where we're looking at 3 factors: your sowing time, seed rate, and herbicides. So in this case, 2018 was a very dry start, so Minnipa couldn't get the trial in any earlier, so it's 11th of May, and then it went bone dry for a long time. So the plan was to only have 3-week delay, but it ended up being 6, because it was just the surface was dry and nothing would have come up anyway. So they decided to delay it, and it's scepter wheat. We have 3 seed rates from low, 100 seeds, medium to high. So we're trying to increase the competition with high seed rate. And then we have either only the knockdown, so the worst control you could get. So let's say you had resistance to whatever selective you might have used, might have been Treflan and just didn't work. Box of Gold, which is not your top end option anymore. And then Secura plus Avadex as our best of what we can do with the preems. So for ryegrass control. So this population, it was a moderate seed bank, about 700 seeds per square meter of ryegrass. You can see that delay sowing, which was quite long, has had a big effect. We've dropped the numbers by about half. Okay, so no surprises there. That's what we would expect. And that benefit remains even with the use of the herbicide. So Box of Gold, about 50 plants to now about 10. So chemicals are working even better with the delay. People would say, well, maybe we should delay sowing because that seems to work well. But my message repeatedly, it might sound like a broken record, will be that the benefit you get with this delay is highly related to the kind of population you've selected on your farm. So we have seen with some weed populations where farmers have had intensive history of cropping, they select for what we call high dormancy populations. So they germinate even when the moisture is there, they establish at a much, much slower rate than Minnipa, the population which has very low dormancy. So you get much bigger response to delay sowing at Minnipa, this population, for example, than some of the other examples I'll show you a bit later on. But really good result, delayed sowing, combination with herbicides, you'd say, well, what's the problem? You know, really wiped it out, which we have. And seed production essentially follows the last graph, where not only have we reduced plant number, but they're also producing a lot less seed. We're essentially wiping it out with Secura Avidex at the second sowing time. The only complicating factor here is this one, because the farmer is not just interested in reducing plant density of weeds or their seed set. They're also interested in what is the optimal yield, how much money am I going to make. And you can see that in all the treatments, even where we only had the knockdown, early sown crop, which had more weeds to deal with, in fact is producing higher yield because it is competing so much better with that higher density. Where we have controlled the weeds effectively, even with Boxer Gold, we're nearly up at 2 ton. Whereas here, even though our numbers were low, you notice how the steps are going up, which essentially means that ryegrass is being quite competitive, because even Secura Avidex here, the yield is higher than what it is for Boxer Gold. So the competition effect is still going on. We reduced the plant number, but it didn't come cheap. It came at a cost of reducing our yield potential by 800 kilograms per hectare. So you can do your sums in dollars per hectare. It would have cost the grower a lot of money in terms of that decision if they had chosen to go down that direction. So even with a very low dormancy population where we got really good response in terms of better knockdown, better pre-em activity, we still have this complicating factor of sacrificing a lot of yield to once you start to delay sowing. So some of you may have brome grass as well. We did a trial at Maribel in 2018 where we're looking at brome grass in barley. So again, same design, early sown, 24th of May, late is 19th, so it's about 4-week difference. And it is Spartacus Clearfield variety because we wanted to have the option of being able to use Intervix as our best option. So we use that as a variety, again, low, medium, high seed rate, and then we have our herbicide options, knockdown only, Treflan Avidex or Treflan Avidex and then Intervix. So really the Rolls Royce, throw everything at it. We are getting the benefit of delayed sowing. We reduce the numbers by about half in all treatments. And as you can see, even where we're using Intervix followed by, at the end, we are causing that reduction. So we're getting that advantage of delayed sowing, and that's how you should get, I guess, with that delay of 4 weeks, you killed about 50% more. But the interesting thing is the brome that was there, even though, you remember in the last slide, if you looked at this particular point, our numbers of plants in the second sowing time are lower. Now you look at this slide, that those lower numbers, which were 40% lower, are in fact setting more seed. So that just comes back to my point that fewer plants, but when the crop is struggling to grow under the cold conditions, and Maribel does get pretty cold, as you would know, the weeds actually start to win. And even with this treatment, which had about 50% lower numbers, is producing same seed set. Okay. However, if the farmer has picked the right variety and can use Intervix, you can see in both situations we basically wiped out brome grass. So Intervix really is going to be the key if we're cropping a lot of these paddocks which have reasonable numbers. Because the good news at this stage at least is that IMI resistance in brome is still at a very, very low level. So we shouldn't be scared of what we've been hearing about ryegrass and just say, no, we'll go easy on interfix. I think we should use it while it's working. Still keep an eye out if resistance starts to develop, but not forego the benefits that this chemistry can deliver. But again, back to the story of delayed sowing and its big yield impact. So what you can see here is the brome obviously is a very competitive weed, and you can see that when more numbers are present, because remember there were more numbers, and at the second sowing time we got really excellent control. We got really good control here as well. So this difference between the blue and the red bar is not due to weed competition, because notice we had wiped out weed in both situations with Intervix. This difference is essentially because we're reducing our crop water use. By planting late, you're evaporating moisture, you're losing that moisture, getting a poorer use, and as a result, here, our yield under the best weed control treatment is 1.3 ton lower, which is running into hundreds of bucks per hectare if we delay sowing as a way of managing weeds. So again, with brome, very good data set to illustrate that even for a very competitive weed, we are better off seeding early and using the right chemistries and preems and the follow-up treatments and get really good outcomes. Delayed sowing, in this case, would have allowed for a lot more seed set. Now this is a trial which Hart were part of in 2019. Similar design again. Here it's worked out perfectly, 3-week delay, which is exactly what we wanted. It's scepter wheat. Rest of the treatments are the same. Knockdown, Boxer Gold, Secura. Just look at this dot point here. This is a population which is highly dormant. So even though we delayed sowing by 3 weeks, we got exactly the same number of ryegrass plants establishing in both systems. 77 plants per square meter versus 74. So when you're dealing with those sort of highly dormant populations, that delayed sowing, you may kill a few extra plants, but in the end, it doesn't really lead to any substantial gain. So you might as well be thinking about other components of the system. And the second bad news here was that even though the numbers are same between the two sowing times, you look at the ryegrass head number now in spring, time of sowing 1 and time of sowing 2. Time of sowing 1 has much lower number of heads of ryegrass than time of sowing 2. So even where the knockdown was used, we got about 60 versus about 160. So why are we getting more heads in the late sown crop? Same principle that I was mentioning earlier, poor competition. Cold conditions have allowed ryegrass to grow through unchecked. It's got tilled more, it produced more heads. Whereas crop is growing slowly and not competing with the weed. So to me, this one is probably the best illustration of the penalties you're likely to experience when you go into these later sowings in some of these environments. So this is 5th of June and 15th of May. So late sown crop, same number of plants, but a lot more heads, nearly 2.5 times or threefold, 3 times more heads. And then another thing that hits you when you delay sowing is the yield penalty. You look at this early sown crop, the bars are fairly similar, which essentially means that they're competing with those 70 plants really well. So even with the knockdown, it's not that far behind Boxer Gold, which means that knockdown has been able, with that extra competition, has been able to handle their ryegrass really well. You look at this later sown crop, the bars have a bigger gap from one to the next, which says that the ryegrass is having a bigger impact on the crop yield when the crop is being sown later. So we are winning on both fronts here. Early sown crop is suppressing our weeds better, as I showed you with the data, with the head number, and we are also producing an extra 1.5 tons of yield. So a really nice data set to illustrate that principle. So to summarize what I've been saying to growers, yes, delayed sowing does provide opportunities to use knockdown herbicides and use our preems when the moisture of the soil is higher. The big thing we are also doing at the same time is we are sacrificing our crop vigor by planting into those cold, really wet conditions, which are not ideal for crop growth rate. And that's what's changing that balance. Reduction in weed density or seed set from those weeds is highly dependent on the weed population. And as I showed you in the last slide with the washpool population and even our roseworthy population, which have high dormancy, you basically see virtually no change in in-crop numbers through those sort of 3-week delays in sowing. Okay? You would if you delayed 3 months, but then you're not going to be growing any crop. So within reason, that delayed sowing does not help us in reducing weed numbers. In most cases, benefits of delayed sowing do not outweigh the losses in grain yield. The last example, we were losing 1.5 tons in grain yield with that 3-week delay, so nearly 500 kilograms per week. That's a lot of money to forego with thinking about managing weeds. Now, barley is generally seen as more forgiving for delay than wheat because we know it's a shorter growing season variety generally, it finishes a bit quicker. But we've seen even in trials, this one here, the one I showed for Maribel, the delayed sowing of barley also caused nearly 300 kilogram per week yield penalty. So you're not winning on the front of weed control, but you're also losing quite high amounts of yield in our environments. Well, I would say what we're starting to see more and more, I guess, is a lot of growers are finishing up pretty well by end of May when there is a reasonable start. To me, I think that's pretty well, we're in that sort of optimal range. So if we can do that with the right varieties that we don't get hit by frost, I reckon that's really what we should be aiming for. Once we're starting to get into June, that's where we start to see them big penalties come in. So to me, I think, Spartacus, even though it does stand upright and allows more chemical to get through, but I think if we're not spraying ridiculously late, I think even that other background will still allow enough chemical to penetrate and hit the weeds. But the benefit for higher competitiveness with Compass will be, is really important. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any data, but we have a trial this year at Roseworthy where we'll be able to answer exactly that for ryegrass, what does that mean when you're growing something like Spartacus? Or if someone had brome but some ryegrass in there as well, is there much of a penalty? And also how much extra seed set you might be getting for ryegrass when you're growing in Spartacus type background versus a vigorous Compass type variety. So I'll be able to answer that next year.